Hello everyone, this is Addie from podfic, back with another podfic. Today I will be doing part 7 of Our Broken Repair Boy. This will be chapters 13 and 14. So let's get right into it. Several hours later, everyone had mostly recovered from the shock of what had happened. Leo was still unconscious, and Piper hadn't left his side once. She was fighting to keep her eyes open, drained after the events which had occurred in such a short period of time. Her eyes were burning, and she could feel herself slowly getting more and more tired. But still, she sat by her best friend's side, waiting and praying to every god she could think of that he would wake up soon. She was in shock. What had just happened? Who were those people Leo saw? Why did the monsters target Leo? And most of all, when would he wake up? Vaguely, she heard a door open behind her, but elected to ignore it, instead focusing on her spiraling thoughts and endless questions. She only snapped out of her thoughts when she felt a heavy hand rest on her shoulder. She looked up to see Jason looking down at her, a soft smile on his face. "Hey, get some sleep," he said gently. "You were closest to Leo when he exploded, I guess. That must have been more tiring for you than it was for the rest of us. Besides, you need rest. I'll watch him." Piper shook her head warily. "I need to be here for him when he wakes up." "Pipes," Jason said, his voice slightly firmer this time. "Leo won't wake up for a while by the looks of it, and if he does, I'll come and wake you straight away. You won't be much help to him if you pass out as soon as he wakes up." Piper sighed and hung her head. "I know. I just feel like I should have known who those people were. The ones he saw, I mean." "You couldn't have known," Jason reassured her. "Leo never told us about them," he frowned. "Come to think of it, Leo never really told us much about himself in general, did he?" Piper thought intently, but could recall almost nothing of Leo's past. Just his mom had died when he was 8. He had been put into foster care, and he had run away 6 times. She didn't even know why he'd run away. "Get some sleep," Jason said, startling Piper, who had almost forgotten he was there. She really did need some rest. "Okay," she relented, and got up to go to her cabin. It didn't take her long to get there, and when she did, she simply flopped onto the bed, fully clothed, and fell asleep. Unfortunately, the fates couldn't let her have one night without nightmares, and tonight Piper had the worst dream she'd ever had. It started with fire. It was everywhere, blocking Piper's vision, filling her lungs with smoke. She doubled over, coughing violently. Her eyes stung and watered, her ears drowning in the sounds of crackling and screams. Before Piper could even assess the situation, someone grabbed her hand tightly. She snapped her head around and was met with the sight of a girl, about 13 years old. She had long brown hair which fell about halfway down her back, and soft gray eyes which didn't quite match her pale skin. Freckles dotted her face, spread across her cheeks. She was beautiful, that was for sure, but rather than love, Piper just felt a strong sisterly feeling for her. Besides, now her beauty was marred. Part of her hair had been burnt off, and her eyes were red, glistening with tears and desperation. There was an ugly red burn along her hand, standing out against the chipped nail varnish. Despite this, she still had a certain beauty about her. The light of the fire shone against her glossy hair. Her eyes still held a certain determination, and despite the difficulties, despite the pain she must have been in, she stood tall, not hesitating to pause if it meant staying with Piper for as long as she waited in the fire. A name popped into Piper's head. Selena. With the thought of this name came a rush of emotions, overprotectiveness, care, joy. It filled Piper with intense happiness and also confusion. What was going on? Who was this? The girl opened her mouth to speak. "Leo, come on, we have to go." Leo? Piper wasn't Leo, but when she looked at her hand, it was tanned like his was, and curly hair fell into her vision, damp with sweat. It was then that she realized this wasn't her dream. She wasn't Piper in this dream. She was Leo. This was his dream, not hers. And somehow she knew it wasn't a dream either. It was a memory. On instinct, Piper started running, and Selena followed. "The others," she found herself saying, but it felt strange to hear someone else's voice come out of her mouth. She didn't even know who the others were. "Safe," Selena replied, her breath coming in wheezing gasps. The smoke seemed to be affecting her more than it was Piper, and Piper quickly realized that this must be due to Leo's fire powers. They must make him immune to smoke, too. Suddenly, Piper heard a crash behind her, which made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Instinctively, she glanced over her shoulder, and she was horrified by what she saw. A dark figure emerged from the flames, holding a large knife, which almost seemed to glow in the harsh orange light of the fire, in one hand. In the other was what at first looked like a whip, but upon closer inspection revealed itself to be a belt, dried blood on the buckle. This sight caused Piper's senses to go haywire. Her heart rate increased, her eyes widened, and she somehow managed to sprint even faster. Selena did the same, and for a moment they were running together, side by side through the burning house. Dimly, Piper registered that it must be a massive house for them to be able to run this far. She had just seen the exit, was just thinking that maybe, just maybe, they could make it when out of nowhere a beam fell from above them, crashing onto the floor with an explosion of sparks. They both pulled up short. Piper was unharmed, but Selena wasn't so lucky. A fire danced up her leg, wrapping its heat around her calf and leaving a trail of fire behind it. Selena shrieked and started trying to roll it on the fire. Smart, but it wasn't working. Without thinking, Piper grabbed her leg and began patting out the fire. She was lucky that Leo was immune to fire, otherwise her hands would have been badly burnt. Selena was pale, sitting on the floor in agony. Her breath came in short pants, the tears spilled over her cheeks. Piper held her face in her hands. "Hermana, are you okay?" she asked desperately. Selena shook her head breathlessly. "Can't walk," she said. "Okay, I'll help you," Piper declared. "We can't stay here." Selena nodded her agreement, and Piper helped her up. Selena leaned on her shoulders, well, technically Leo's shoulder, and began limping towards the side exit. They were almost there. Every muscle in Piper's body was screaming, and Selena's pain sobs broke him. But they were almost there, so they kept going. They kept limping towards the door. "Almost there. Come on. They were right there. Just a few more steps. You can do it." Piper grabbed the handle and yanked the door open. "Come on," into the fresh air, away from the smoke, away from the fire, and they flung themselves out of the door. They made it out. They kept going. Selena began walking a bit on her own, and they sped up until eventually they were almost running again. Piper's heart lifted with every step they took, every step which took them closer to freedom. "Let's take a break," Piper said, aware of the pain Selena was in. She nodded faintly and slumped against a tree, prompting Piper to look around and take note of their surroundings. They had been running through a small forest, and were now in a small clearing by the edge of the trees. It was dark, but Piper couldn't see the sky easily through the thick canopy. However, she could see a small hill only about 30 meters away. It wasn't very tall, it only had a single tree right at the top. It'd be a very pretty place if it wasn't for the fact that they were running from a fire, and what Leo's dream revealed to her was his foster dad. Gods, Piper hadn't known. Just then she heard a snap of twigs. She glanced around, suddenly alert. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Selena doing the same thing. What happened next went so fast, Piper almost definitely would have missed it if it weren't for Leo's oddly sharp senses. A figure burst out of the bushes and went for Selena. Her shriek echoed through the clearing, startling a few birds from a nearby tree. Piper sprinted to get Selena before the figure did, but she was forced to freeze in the middle of the clearing. Light fell across the man's face. The name Jacob appeared in Piper's mind, accompanied by an immense fear. He was panting and covered in horrifying burns, his eyes wild and manic. He was a mess. Twigs in his hair, hands violently shaking, but worst of all, he was holding the knife from earlier to Selena's throat, gripping her hair tightly. They stood there for a second, Jacob holding a knife to Selena's throat, Selena trying desperately to not let her fear show. Piper in Leo's body froze, watching, trying to figure out a way to save her. "You little shit," Jacob said. "You think you can get away from me? You'll never escape. I'll always find you." He laughed. It was an awful, racking laugh, sending spit flying. Piper flinched violently, or rather, Leo did. "You'll never get rid of me, especially when your darling little sister is dead at my hands." Another horrible laugh. And then it happened. Piper saw it coming. It seemed to happen in slow motion. Jacob moved his hand ever so slightly, began to drag the knife across the pale skin of Selena's throat. She saw the panic in her eyes, the way she instinctively twisted away as much as she could, how Jacob was too drunk to hold her properly. She saw how Selena fell to the floor, and instantly she lunged for her, trying to grab her arm, but Jacob got there first. He slashed blindly with the knife, and the sharp cry Selena released meant he had managed to rip through flesh. This theory was quickly confirmed by a deep red staining her clothes, dripping through her fingers onto the floor. Jacob seemed to realize what he had done at that point, and he booked it, running from the clearing as fast as he could. Piper ignored him, dropping to her knees at Selena's side. She was laying on her back, taking desperate, gasping breaths, but Piper could hear the way her breath rattled. She wouldn't live much longer. "Leo," she managed, a tear slipping down her cheek. I can't see the moon." A rush of sadness swallowed Piper. Selena, this sweet, sweet angel in her dying moments, all she wanted was to see the moon glow one last time. But how could she manage that? The answer hit her within seconds. The hill she had seen earlier, she could easily get there with Selena before she took her last breath. "Don't worry," Piper said, still not used to hearing Leo's voice when she spoke. "The moon's always there. I'll show you." And with that, she picked Selena up bridal style, surprised at how easy it was. Leo was stronger than she thought. Or maybe Selena was just extremely light. Piper breasted off, instead choosing to focus every ounce of her energy on getting Selena to the hill, not allowing herself to stop. She felt the blood soaking through her shirt, dripping down onto the floor, but still she carried on, walking as fast as she could. Less than 5 minutes later, they were at the top of the hill. Piper lay down Selena as gently as she could, making sure that her view of the moon wouldn't be blocked out by the branches of the tree. I can see the moon, Selena said. Her voice broke, and Piper's heart ached for the girl. She was too young for this. Leo was too young to watch this. Selena sniffled slightly, and more tears leaked out, slipping sideways down her face. It's so pretty. Yeah, it is, isn't it? Piper found herself saying. Leo's voice was unusually smooth when she spoke, as if he wasn't watching her foster sister die in front of him. I can see the moon again, Selena repeated, her voice dreamy. Thank you, Leo. I love you. I love you too, Leo whispered quietly. Not Piper, no. This was all Leo, telling his foster sister in her last moments how much he loved her. I can see the moon, Selena repeated. With that, the sound of her breathing stopped, the stars still reflecting in her silvery eyes. Piper bent over and kissed her forehead, and suddenly the mask dropped, and Leo was sobbing for his dead sister. He bent over her body desperately and clung her to his chest, sobbing and crying heartbrokenly. He grabbed the knife from her body and flung it as far as he could, screaming and crying so hard his body shook, and Piper woke up, tears still on her cheek. She sat up in bed, glancing around desperately. Oh, gods, was that really what Leo saw every night when he fell asleep? Even worse, that had actually happened to him? God, she couldn't even begin to fathom what that must have been like for him, even after living through it herself. How did he manage to smile and laugh after all that bullshit he had dealt with in his life? Suddenly, a horrible thought struck Piper. What if Leo had been having the same dream? She jumped out of bed and was just about to head to the door, as if on cue, Jason burst through the door. You're awake, he said, startled for a second before regaining his composure. Good, something's happening with Leo, we don't know what. Before he could finish his sentence, Piper was out of the door, sprinting through the corridors as fast as she could. Her heart was pounding, and it started beating faster when she slammed the infirmary doors open to see a sweaty, gasping Leo thrashing around in his bed. His eyes were still closed, but tears flooding out from under them. Annabeth was by his side and glancing up when she heard the door crash open. Oh, thank the gods, Piper. We don't know what happened. He just started thrashing around out of nowhere. Do you know? Nightmare, she interrupted grimly, heading over to his side. How do you know? I'll explain later, Piper said. I'm going to try and speak him awake. She wasn't sure why she hadn't thought of this before. It just occurred to her in that moment. Okay, Annabeth nodded and stepped back. From the sides, Percy, Frank, and Hazel watched anxiously with her. Jason walked in at just that moment and joined them in watching her. Leo, she whispered desperately in his ear. Wake up, please wake up. She threw all the charm speak she could into her voice, praying to Apollo that he would hear her. And he did. His eyes flung open, and he shot up in bed, gasping and looking around desperately. Leo? Piper breathed and flung her arms around his neck. He blinked. Pipes? He asked, still sounding out of breath. What? Shh, she said, muffled by his shoulders. I'll explain in a bit. Leo hesitated, but carefully lifted his arms and rested them on her shoulders. When they broke apart, he was looking very confused. Can someone please explain to me what happened? You had a nightmare, Jason spoke up. After the thing with the shadows, you passed out and didn't wake up for a while. Just now you had a nightmare and Piper managed to try and speak you awake. Leo sat there for a moment, processing. Okay, he said, turning to Piper. How did you know I was having a nightmare? Yeah, how did you know? Annabeth asked. You were so sure. Piper took a deep breath. How do I explain this? I kinda saw it, I guess. I fell asleep earlier and kinda had your dreams. Leo paled drastically. So you saw what I just dreamt? He asked, sounding as if he wished he was understanding wrong. Yeah, and we are so talking about that later, Piper said firmly. Leo cringed. Yeah, I thought so. How about we just focus on what happened with the shadow things for now? Frank asked. Sounds good to me, Leo said, obviously trying to avoid the conversation he was going to have later. He leaned back in the hospital bed and stretched. So, where should we begin? That was Chapter 13. Now this will be Chapter 14. Jason jumped in. Who were those people? What happened to them? Leo closed his eyes and bit his lip. The first one was my mom. You all know what happened to her. She died when I was 8. The room was deathly silent, no one daring to even breathe in case Leo changed his mind about telling them. The second one, my foster brother. We were in my second foster home together. I tried to save him. I couldn't. Okay, Hazel prompted gently. And the girl? Leo closed his eyes, and when he reopened them a few moments later, they were bright with tears. Her name was Alexis. We met when I was at one of my foster homes. She was my girlfriend, but she died a 1.5 years ago. Oh, Hazel said softly. Okay, Jason said. How did she die? That's a very long and depressing story, Leo warned. Piper and Annabeth know already. They can tell you that much. The rest of the demigods looked at Percy and Annabeth in surprise. They nodded in confirmation. You still want to know? Leo asked. Yes, Frank said firmly. Yes, we do. Leo half laughed. Okay, we'll see if you regret it. She took a deep breath and released it in a sigh. When I was still in foster care, I ran away a lot. I had 9 foster homes. I ran away from 6 of them. There were lots of reasons. I won't get into them now. My last one, before I got taken to the wilderness school, was with a foster mother called Miss Teresa. She was horrible, all happy and smiling in front of the social worker, but as soon as she left, she completely changed. First thing she did was snap at me to get her some wine. When I didn't react straight away, she yelled. So I figured out my way to the kitchen, poured her some wine, and brought it to her. She told me to go to the basement, so I did. Leo sighed again. This was where it would start to get more difficult. When I got there, the first thing I saw was a little boy, about 7 years old. He seemed pretty badly injured. When I looked around properly, I saw 3 other kids, 2 girls and 1 more boy. They were all beaten and bruised. What happened to them? Jason couldn't resist asking. Leo chuckled darkly. Take a guess. Miss Teresa, Piper said. Yeah, Leo confirmed softly. Miss Teresa happened. Oh, Hazel said softly. Yeah, Leo said grimly. So it went on like that. Every time someone made a mistake, or even if they didn't, Miss Teresa would beat us half to death. A heavy silence weighed on the room before Leo continued talking. The only thing which was slightly good about it was the fact that once a week we would go outside to pretend that we were all such a happy family. Normally we wouldn't be left alone during these times, but people started getting suspicious that we were never seen alone, so we were let out on our own. I found a clearing in some woods. There was a girl there. Her name was Alexis. We talked. We became good friends. From then on, we met every week in the same clearing. Leo smiled fondly at the memory. He cleared her throat. But then I fucked up. I dropped a plate and Miss Teresa flipped. She grabbed the biggest chunk of it and stabbed me with it, through the hand. I've still got a scar, actually. He raised his hand, revealing a jagged white line across his left palm. When I met up with Lexi the next day, she noticed the bandage, demanding to know what happened. I tried to make up some lie, but the girl had a built-in lie detector. She got it out of me in the end. She was furious, wanted to go to the police, but the last kid who tried, the 7-year-old boy I saw in the basement, he disappeared, never saw him again. So I convinced her not to, and it became our little secret. She brought medical supplies every time we met up. We grew closer over time, and then, on my 14th birthday, she kissed me. I kissed her back, but Miss Teresa would kill her, so we started dating in secret. It worked for about 8 months. I fell for her harder every time I saw her. I loved her. She loved me. But then, Leo's voice faltered. Miss Teresa found out. I don't know how, but she did, and she killed Lexi. His voice cracked ever so slightly, and he stared up at the ceiling, blinking away tears. Piper gently slipped her hand into his, and he smiled at her gratefully. I ran away. I got caught, and life went on, without Lexi. Leo smiled weakly. There it is, the full story. Happy? Jason found his voice. I don't think anyone could be happy after hearing that. Leo put on a bright smile. I could. I'm good at that. Piper and Jason glanced at each other, slightly startled at his sudden false happiness. It looked so real. Leo stretched. Any more questions, or can I go back to sleep? Annabeth spoke up. Leo, how would you feel about me and Percy telling them about what happened while you sleep? It might make it a bit easier if you don't have to say it. Leo considered it for a brief moment. Yeah, I think that would work best, he agreed eventually. So can I sleep? Annabeth smiled slightly, but she couldn't quite hide the sad look in her eyes. Yes, you can sleep. Get some rest. We'll wake you up when we're done. Before she had even finished talking, Leo had burrowed down into his blankets and was beginning to fall asleep. What were you talking about? Piper asked instantly. What happened? Percy sighed. At that moment, he looked so much older than he was. He ran a tired hand through his hair. Let's go to my cabin. We can explain there. Once everyone had piled into Percy's cabin and figured out a place to sit, whether that be the bed, the floor, or the top of a drawer, Percy spoke. Okay, first of all, I'm going to warn you that this is fairly disturbing and does not fit in with what we know of Leo at all. You're going to have to be open-minded, okay? Jason glanced at Piper in concern, but nodded his head. Around him the others did the same. Percy sighed. It's kind of a long story, but I'll start from the beginning so that you can understand completely. So about a week ago, I woke up in the middle of the night to get some fresh air. I went above deck and saw Leo. He was sitting up at the top of the ship, by which I mean the mast. Hazel gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. What if he fell? He did, Percy said, but he did a perfect flip, landing on his feet and rolling so he would not get injured. When he saw me, I asked how he did that. He acted like it was nothing. Then I noticed his eyes were red, like he had been crying. So I asked him about that. He said it was because he was tired and he had an invention to work on. But that was an obvious lie. He went back to his cabin, and I went back to mine, but that wasn't it. Over the next few days, I noticed he wasn't eating much or taking many breaks. I confronted him about it, and he started taking care of himself a little more, but then something happened. Percy sat up straighter and looked all of them in the eye. This is where Annabeth comes in, and it's also where I'm gonna need you to not interrupt. Got it? Everyone nodded. So I was on patrol when I heard a crash from Leo's room. I went to check it out, and the door was slightly open. I went inside, and he wasn't there, but I heard the shower running, which I thought was a bit weird considering it was very late at night. I knocked on the door and asked if he was okay, but he didn't respond. I started to get more worried then, and I told him that if he didn't open up, I'd break the door down. When he didn't say anything, I decided that I should probably check if he was okay. I'm glad I did now. When I got inside, I saw Leo, and I saw he didn't say anything when I was trying to talk to him through the door. Percy closed his eyes, apparently startling himself for what was to come. This filled Jason with dread. Anything which could make the savior of Olympus seem so shattered was not good. Leo was in the shower, fully clothed, slumped against the wall. He was covered in blood, and when I looked closely, it was coming from several deep cuts on his arms. No. How could he be doing this to himself? How had Jason never noticed? How? His thoughts were a jumble. Was this his fault somehow? He hadn't talked to Leo at all during the construction of the Argo 2. It hit Jason like a truck. Months. It had been months since he'd had a real conversation with Leo. He had kept telling himself that he would do it after the war was over, but now he was realizing that could have been too late. No one spoke, silent in their horror. Leo tried to kill himself. Leo, the forever upbeat, overly happy repair boy, had tried to kill himself on the same boat as them, and they had no idea. After a moment of deafening silence, Percy spoke again. He didn't seem to recognize me. I said I was going to get the others, but he refused. He could barely even talk. His eyes were fixed on a point behind me, but when I looked, there was nothing there. I ran to get Annabeth. Annabeth took over from here. Percy knocked on my door, and when I opened it, he was obviously covered in blood. At first I thought it was his, but then he told me it wasn't. It was Leo's. He told me to follow him, so I grabbed some medical supplies and followed him to Leo's cabin. When we got there, Leo was nowhere in sight. I was confused at first, but then Percy went to the bathroom. I followed him, and I saw Leo bleeding out in the shower. We managed to stop the bleeding. Percy used his powers to wash off the blood and dry his clothes. Once that was done, we took him to his room and waited for him to wake up. That took about 2 days. Piper gasped. When he was fixing repairs and we didn't see him for 2 days. He was unconscious with an IV drip in his arm to give him ambrosia, Percy confirmed. Jason's head was buzzing. He had been angry at Leo for the delay. If only he knew. When he woke up, he was hesitant to talk about it, but we got it out of him. He told us about Lexi and a little about foster care. He had a nightmare about that. That's what triggered it, he said. When that was done, we put him on a suicide watch of sorts. Me and Percy would be with him at all times. We made sure he ate and slept, but mostly we made sure he didn't hurt himself. Annabeth paused. It's probably important that you know this wasn't a new thing. He had lots of scars on his wrists, and when we thought about it, he does have a habit of disregarding his health for others. A few days after, when he had been showing behavior that he actually wanted to recover, we left him alone for about 10 minutes as a trial run of sorts. It worked. He was fine, so we left him alone again, later with the promise that we would be checking for new scars when we got back. That was the day of the attack. You all know what happened then, and what's happened since then. So you're all caught up. That's what happened. No one said anything until Frank broke the silence. Fuck. Leo awoke to being gently shaken. I'm up, he groaned, burying his face in the pillow. What do you want? Leo, a girl's voice said, you need to wake up. The others want to talk to you. And just like that, it all came back to him. Well, that ain't good, he said, pushing himself up in bed. Everyone looked extremely remorseful, with the exception of Percy and Annabeth. Leo, man, I'm so sorry I didn't notice, Jason whispered. His eyes were wet, like rain in a bright blue sky. Leo groaned. Don't look at me like that, please. You're all doing that pity look. Don't. Piper was the first to speak. Okay, we won't. Let's talk about something else. Let's talk about sleepovers. We should all have a sleepover. We have phones now. We can watch a movie all together. It'll be fun. Everyone else stared at her, but Leo broke out into a smile. Yeah, he said. Yeah, that would be great. Which movie should we watch? The others caught on and started chiming in with their movie choices. Leo watched on with a smile. Maybe, just maybe, they had been right. Maybe this time everything would be okay. And that was chapters 13 and 14 of Our Broken Repair Boy. I hope you all enjoyed, and sorry for this video being late. Something came up, and I might be able to get an extra one out this week, because I wasn't able to last week. That would be the Taboos of Percy Jackson, because I kind of just forgot about that one. If I'm able to get an extra one out. If not, the next video will be on Sunday. Hope you all enjoyed. Bye!